This happened about 4 years ago when I was living in Chicago. I was working 2 jobs at the time just to make rent. One was a standard day job at a retail store, and the other was an evening shift stocking shelves at a grocery store that usually went until about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't have a car, so I relied entirely on the L train to get around. If you've ever ridden the L late at night, you know it has a completely different vibe than during the day. During the rush hour, it's annoying and crowded. At 2 a.m., it feels like a liminal space, like you've stepped out of reality. It was a Tuesday night in November. It was freezing cold, that specific type of Chicago wind that cuts right through your jacket. I clocked out around 1:45 a.m. I was exhausted, my back hurt from lifting boxes, and all I wanted to do was get home, heat up some leftovers, and pass out. I walked the 3 blocks to the station, my head down, listening to a podcast to drown out the city noise. When I got up to the platform, it was completely deserted. That wasn't totally unusual for a Tuesday, but usually there's at least 1 or 2 other people, maybe a shift worker or someone coming back from a bar. Tonight, it was just me and the flickering fluorescent lights humming overhead. The wait time board said the next train was 12 minutes away. I stood near the heat lamp, shivering, just staring at the tracks. When the train finally pulled in, it was almost silent. I stepped into the 3rd car. I usually pick the cars near the middle because that's where the conductor usually is, or at least where more people tend to sit. But as the doors hissed shut, I realized I was the only person in the entire car. I looked through the glass connecting the cars. The one in front was empty, too. I sat down in one of the aisle seats, threw my backpack on the seat next to me, and pulled out my phone. I remember scrolling through Instagram, just mindlessly liking photos, trying to keep my eyes open. We went 3 stops without anyone getting on or off. The rhythmic clacking of the train on the tracks was hypnotic. I must have started dozing off because my head kept dipping. Okay. Then, at the 4th stop, I heard the doors open. Okay. I didn't look up immediately. Okay. I just saw a pair of black boots step onto the train from my peripheral vision. The doors closed, and the train started moving again. The person didn't walk past me. They sat down in the very last row of the car, right near the door they entered. I felt a little weird about it. By adamant, I sit all the way in the back, but I brushed it off. People are weird, and everyone likes their space. I turned the volume up on my headphones and went back to my phone. About 5 minutes passed. The train slowed down for a bend in the tracks, and the screeching of the wheels was deafening. I happened to glance at the reflection in the dark window opposite me. The guy in the back, he was wearing a dark gray hoodie with the hood up, was standing up. He wasn't walking toward the door to get off. He was standing in the middle of the aisle, facing my direction. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, swaying slightly with the motion of the train. I quickly looked away from the reflection, my heart doing a little jump. Don't make eye contact, I told myself. Just a drunk guy. Don't engage. I kept my eyes glued to my phone screen, but I wasn't reading anything anymore. I was listening. I paused my music, keeping the headphones on so it looked like I was occupied. I listened for footsteps. Silence. Just the rumble of the train. I risked a glance over my shoulder, pretending to stretch my neck. He was closer. He hadn't made a sound. It was now maybe 10 rows behind me, standing in the aisle, perfectly still. His hands were in his hoodie pockets. The hood cast a shadow over his face, so I couldn't make out any features, but I could tell his head was tilted slightly, like he was observing me. I turned back around, and my stomach dropped. The rationality was gone. This wasn't normal behavior. The next stop was coming up. I decided I would get off. I didn't care if I had to wait another 20 minutes for the next train or call an expensive Uber. I just needed to get away from this guy. The train began to decelerate. Come on, I thought. Just open the doors. The train stopped. The intercom crackled. Doors opening. I grabbed my bag, stood up, and walked quickly toward the doors. I didn't run because I didn't want to trigger a chase reflex or look like a victim. I stepped out onto the platform. As soon as my feet hit the concrete, I turned to check. The guy hadn't moved. He was still standing in the aisle, 10 rows back, just watching me leave. The doors chimed and slid shut. I watched the train pull away, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was at a station I wasn't familiar with. It was in a rougher part of the neighborhood, and the platform was dimly lit. I walked over to a bench and sat down to check my Uber app. Searching for drivers, I waited. It was taking forever. Then, I heard a sound from the other side of the tracks. The cipher trains going the opposite direction. I looked across the tracks. Standing on the opposite platform, staring directly at me, was the guy in the gray hoodie. My blood ran cold. How did he get there? The train he was on had just left going north. There was no way he could have gotten off, run down the stairs, under the tunnel, and back up to the other side in 10 seconds. Unless he didn't get off the train I was on. Unless this was a different guy. Or unless my mind was playing tricks on me. But the hoodie was identical. The stance was identical. He raised a hand and pointed at me. Not a wave. A finger pointing right at my chest. Okay. Then he started walking toward the stairs that led down to the underpass, the tunnel that connects the two platforms. He was coming to my side. Panic set in. Real, primal panic. I canceled the Uber request. I didn't have time to wait for a car. I looked at the station exit. It was down a long flight of stairs at the end of the platform. I started walking toward the exit, looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds. I heard heavy footsteps echoing from the stairwell below the tracks. He was running through the tunnel. I bolted. I sprinted for the exit turnstiles. I vaulted over the turnstile, not bothering to swipe my card, and burst out onto the street level. The street was empty, rows of dark warehouses and a few streetlights. I picked a direction and ran. I ran until my lungs burned. I didn't hear footsteps behind me anymore, but I didn't stop until I saw a 24-hour gas station about 6 blocks away. I burst inside, terrifying the clerk. I stood there, panting, clutching my side, staring out the glass front of the store. I stayed in that gas station for an hour until a friend answered their phone and came to pick me up. I never saw the guy in the gray hoodie again. I quit my night job 2 weeks later because I couldn't bring myself to get on the train after midnight. What scares me the most isn't that he followed me, it's how we got to the other platform. It's physically impossible given the time frame. Sometimes I wonder if there were 2 of them working together, signaling each other from opposite sides of the tracks. And I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed on that platform for just 1 minute longer. I've always been a logical person. I don't believe in ghosts, and I don't usually get scared easily. But the events of last winter shook me so badly that I still have nightmares about the sound of whistling. I was traveling from London to Edinburgh by train to visit my parents for Christmas. It's a long journey, usually about 4.5 hours. It's because of a snowstorm that had hit the UK. Many trains were cancelled or delayed. I ended up on a service that left King's Cross at 9 p.m., meaning I wouldn't get into Edinburgh until well past 1 a.m. The train was one of those older models, the ones with the sliding doors that separate the vestibule from the seating area. The heating was blasting, making the carriage stuffy and dry. For the first few hours, the carriage was semi-full. Families, students, people going home for the holidays. But as we made stops in York, Newcastle, and Berwick, the train emptied out. By the time we crossed the border into Scotland, it was just me and one other passenger in my carriage. I was sitting at a table seat, working on my laptop. The other passenger was a man sitting 3 rows behind me on the other side of the aisle. I hadn't paid much attention to him when he got on, other than noticing he was wearing a very heavy, dirty-looking trench coat that smelled faintly of damp wool and tobacco. Around 12:30 a.m., the train came to a halt in the middle of nowhere. We weren't at a station. It's outside. It was pitch black, just a wall of darkness and snow hitting the window. The intercom buzzed. Ladies and gentlemen, we're being held at a red signal due to ice on the tracks ahead. We should be moving shortly. Great. I sighed and closed my laptop to save battery. The silence in the carriage was heavy. That's when the whistling started. It wasn't a tune I recognized. It was low, discordant, and breathy. It was coming from the man behind me. I tried to ignore it. I put my headphones on, but my battery had died an hour ago, so they were just muffling the sound, not blocking it. The whistling stopped. Then I heard the sound of fabric rustling, like he was shifting in his seat. "Excuse me," a voice rasped. I froze, debated pretending I hadn't heard him, but the carriage was silent. It would be obvious. I turned around slowly. The man was leaning into the aisle. He looked older, maybe in his 50s, with greasy hair plastered to his forehead and skin that looked gray under the carriage lights. His eyes were wide, uncomfortably wide. "Do you have the time?" he asked. "Huh? Yeah," I said, looking at my wrist. "It's 12:45. He didn't say thank you. He just stared at me. His mouth curled up into a smile that showed too many teeth. "Late," he whispered. "Very late." I turned back around, facing forward. My heart rate had kicked up a notch. There was something about his tone that triggered every alarm bell in my head. I heard him stand up. I didn't look back. I stared at my reflection in the dark window. I could see him in the glass. He was standing in the aisle, looking at the back of my head. He took a step forward, then another. He wasn't walking past me to go to the toilet. He stopped right next to my table. I looked up, trying to look annoyed rather than terrified. "Can I help you?" He placed a hand on the headrest of the empty seat opposite me. His fingernails were black with dirt. "This train isn't going to make it," he said. His voice was flat, matter of fact. "They said it's just a signal issue," I replied, gripping my phone tight. "No," he said, leaning in closer. "The ice. It keeps us here. It wants us here." I realized then that he wasn't just creepy, he was mentally unstable. I didn't want to agitate him. "Okay, I'm sure we'll be moving soon," I said softly. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the sliding glass door at the end of the carriage. He pressed the button, the door whooshed open, and he stepped into the vestibule between cars. The door slid shut behind him. I let out a breath. I decided I was going to move. "Okay," grabbed my bag and laptop. I was going to walk to the next carriage up, find the conductor, find anyone. I stood up and looked toward the vestibule door where he had just exited. He was standing there. Through the glass, I could see him. He hadn't gone to the next car. He was standing in the small, dark space between the carriages, pressing his face against the glass, watching me. He started whistling again. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I could see his lips pursed. He tapped on the glass with one finger. Tap, tap, tap. I sat back down. I was terrified to walk past him to get to the next car. What if he grabbed me? The vestibule is loud. No one would hear me scream. I checked my phone. 1 bar of service. Kai texted my dad. "On train. Stopped. Weird guy harassing me. Scared." The message failed to send. I looked up at the door again. He was gone. The vestibule was empty. I felt a wave of relief, followed by a new wave of fear. Where did he go? Into the next car? Or was he in the bathroom in the vestibule? Suddenly, the train lurched forward. We were moving. I stayed in my seat, my eyes fixed on that door. 10 minutes passed. 20. We were approaching Edinburgh Waverley Station. As the lights of the city started to appear, I felt safer. I packed my things, ready to sprint off as soon as the doors opened. The train pulled into the station. It was huge and echoing at 1:30 a.m. I was the first one off the train. I walked fast down the platform. I looked back at the train windows as I walked. I wanted to see if he was getting off. I didn't see him get off, but as the train pulled away to go to the depot, I saw him. He was inside the train, but he wasn't in a passenger seat. "Okay," He was standing in the driver's cab at the rear of the train. The inactive cab was pressed against the rear windshield, looking out at the receding platform. He was waving at me. Reported it to the station police immediately. They checked the train when it arrived at the depot. They told me there was no one on board. No passengers, no stowaways. They checked the CCTV. They saw me sitting in the carriage. They saw me talking to someone. But on the camera, the seat behind me was empty. The police suggested I was tired, hallucinating from stress. But I know what I saw. I know the smell of that damp wool coat. And sometimes, when it's really quiet in my apartment, I swear I can hear that discordant whistling coming from the hallway. I haven't taken a night train since